My daughter almost married a con man, and I almost let it happen because I trusted the wrong person and doubted myself at the wrong moment. I've been carrying this story for a while now, not because it ended badly, it didn't, but because I came so close to walking my girl down that aisle and handing her over to someone who saw her as a transaction. That thought still wakes me up at 3 in the morning sometimes, still makes my chest tighten in a way I can't quite explain to people who haven't been there. My name is not important right now. What's important is that I'm a father. 63 years old, retired from 31 years with the Postal Service, living in Charlotte, North Carolina, in the same house where I raised my 2 kids after their mother passed, my daughter. I'll call her my baby girl, because that's what she is and always will be. Her name is Vivian. She was 31 when this happened. Smart woman, graduated from UNC Charlotte, worked as a hospital administrator, had her own condo in Ballantyne. I raised her right. Her mother would have been proud. The man she brought home 2 years before the wedding was named Garrett. Garrett Allen. He was 34, said he was in commercial real estate, drove a nice car, wore good shoes, shook my hand firmly the first time we met. I remember thinking he seemed too polished, too ready, like a man who had practiced being likable. But I told myself I was just being a father, being protective, being unreasonable. Vivian was happy. She looked at him the way her mother used to look at me in the early years. What right did I have to question that? So I kept my mouth shut. I showed up to the dinners. I made small talk with Garrett about the Panthers, about the housing market, about whatever topic he steered us toward. He was good at steering conversations. I noticed that, but told myself it was just confidence. Successful people are confident. That's what I told myself. He proposed on a Saturday night in November, took Vivian to the Capitol Grill downtown, got down on one knee, posted the whole thing on Instagram before he even called me. I found out my daughter was engaged from a social media notification. That bothered me more than I let on. The wedding was set for the following October, 14 months away. Vivian threw herself into planning. The venue was a restored barn out in Waukesha. Beautiful place, exposed wood beams, string lights everywhere, capacity for about 200 guests. She had a notebook, several notebooks. She was the happiest I'd seen her since she got her master's degree. I tried to be happy too, but something kept scratching at the back of my mind about Garrett. Nothing I could name, nothing specific, just a feeling. The kind of feeling my mother used to call a check in your spirit. A warning that doesn't come with an explanation. I started paying attention differently, not snooping, just watching, and what I noticed was small things. Garrett always seemed to know exactly what to say, but he never said much about his family. His parents were complicated, he said. His brother, he wasn't close with anymore. His friends from before he moved to Charlotte were busy people who never seemed to be available when we had gatherings. When I asked him once where he grew up, he gave me a town in Ohio, but changed the subject so fast I almost didn't notice. About 8 months before the wedding, Vivian mentioned casually that she and Garrett were looking at houses together. A house in Ballantyne, close to her condo, listed at $640,000. She said Garrett had found a great opportunity, that the seller was motivated, that they could get it under market value. I asked her what Garrett was putting in. She hesitated just a little, then said they were still working out the financial details. I asked her again, differently, what does Garrett's contribution look like on paper? She said, "Daddy, don't start." I didn't start. But I didn't stop thinking about it either. The wedding was 3 months out when everything changed. It was a Saturday in July. Vivian had asked me to come to the venue for a final walkthrough with the event coordinator. Garrett was supposed to be there too, but he texted at the last minute saying he was running late, stuck in a showing on the south side of town. Vivian and the coordinator went to walk the outdoor ceremony space, and I stayed inside near the main hall to get out of the heat for a few minutes. The barn had these old wooden stalls along one wall that had been converted into sort of an alcove seating area. The wall panels were old, original wood, and they didn't seal perfectly. I was sitting in one of those alcoves checking my phone when I heard the side door open. Two male voices. One was Garrett's. The other I didn't recognize. I want to be clear about something. I was not hiding. I was not following anyone. I was just sitting in a dim corner of a barn cooling down, and two men walked in 30 feet away and started talking without knowing I was there. What happened next was not something I planned or engineered. It was just what happened. The other man said something about money first, something about timing. I couldn't make out the full sentence. But then Garrett laughed, and I heard Garrett's voice clearly. He said, "Relax. 3 months and I'm locked in. The house is in her name, but I'll be on the deed. Give it 18 months after the wedding, maybe 2 years. File irreconcilable differences. And in North Carolina, that's an equitable distribution state. I get half of everything." The other man said something I couldn't fully hear. Garrett said she's not going to see it coming. She trusts me completely. Her dad's the only one who ever looked at me sideways, and even he backed off. Old man doesn't want to upset his little girl. Then he said her name. My daughter's name. And he laughed again. I have been angry in my life. Real anger. The kind that comes from injustice or loss or betrayal. I thought I knew what anger felt like. But what moved through me in that moment was something else entirely. It was cold. It was clear. It settled over me like I'd stepped into still water, and in that stillness I understood exactly what I needed to do and exactly what I needed not to do. I did not walk out of that alcove. I sat completely still, and I picked up my phone, opened the voice memo app, and hit record. What came next, over the next 4 minutes and some seconds, was Garrett Allen laying out, in his own words, to another man, a plan to marry my daughter, establish joint property rights, wait out a comfortable period, and then divorce her and take half of what she had built with her own hands over 10 years of her life. He mentioned the condo. He mentioned her 401k. He mentioned a brokerage account she'd opened 2 years ago that I didn't even know about. He knew the numbers. He had done his homework. The other man asked about prenuptial agreements. Garrett said Vivian had mentioned one early on, and he had talked her out of it. He said it took some effort, but that she came around. He said, "Once a woman feels like you trust her completely, she'll do almost anything to protect that feeling." I kept recording. They wrapped up the conversation in a few minutes. The side door opened and closed. I sat in that alcove for a long time after they left. When Vivian came back inside with the event coordinator, I was standing at the window looking out at the field. She came over and put her arm through mine and said, "Isn't it beautiful, Daddy?" I said yes. I said yes because it was true, and because I needed to think, and I needed time, and I needed to do this the right way. That night, I sat at my kitchen table for 4 hours. I listened to the recording 11 times. I wrote down every specific statement Garrett had made. The 401k, the condo, the brokerage account, the 18-month timeline, the prenuptial agreement he had talked her out of. Then I called my brother. He's 71, lives in Greensboro, spent 25 years as a claims investigator for an insurance company. He knows people. More importantly, he knows how to find things. I told him everything. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" I said I didn't know yet. He said, "Yes, you do. You're just deciding how." He was right. Here's what I thought about all night. If I went to Vivian with the recording immediately, one of two things would happen. Either she would believe me right away, which would break something in her that I was not sure I could fix, because she had given this man 2 years of her life and was 3 months from her wedding day. Or she would not believe me fully, not at first, because the human heart resists the information that destroys what it loves. She might think the recording was out of context. She might make excuses. She might be so deep in planning and love and expectation that the truth would come in sideways instead of straight, and Garrett would find a way to spin it before it landed. I needed her to know without any doubt. I needed there to be no room for maybe I misheard, or maybe he didn't mean it that way. I needed her to see it herself. My brother spent 6 days making calls. A former colleague who now worked private investigation in the Triad, another contact in Cuyahoga County, Ohio. What came back was not a surprise to me, but it confirmed what the recording had already told me about who Garrett Allen really was. He had done this before, not identically, but close. In Columbus, Ohio, 8 years ago, there had been a woman, a nurse practitioner with a house and savings, who had married a man matching Garrett's description and background, gone through a divorce 18 months later, and lost a significant portion of her assets in the settlement. The ex-husband had moved out of state shortly after. My brother's contact could not prove beyond legal certainty that it was the same man, but the similarities were not coincidental. I now had the recording in a pattern. I did not go to Vivian. Not yet. What I did instead was call her on a Tuesday evening and ask if she wanted to come over for dinner that Sunday. Just the two of us. The way we used to do when she was in her 20s and living in her first apartment. She said yes immediately. That told me she was still my daughter underneath everything. Still the girl who had always known when her father needed to talk to her even when he hadn't said so yet. Sunday came. I made her mother's pot roast. We ate at the dining room table and talked about nothing important for the first part of the meal. Then she looked at me across the table and said, "Okay, Daddy, what is it?" I put down my fork. I said, "I need you to listen to me completely before you say anything. Can you do that?" She looked scared then, not of me, of what I might say, but she nodded. I played her the recording, the whole thing, 4 minutes and some seconds. I watched her face while she listened. I watched a small confusion at the beginning, and the moment the confusion became recognition, and the moment the recognition became understanding, and the moment the understanding became something that had no good word for it. Not grief exactly, not rage exactly, something that was both and neither. When it ended, she didn't say anything for almost 2 minutes. I didn't either. Then she said very quietly, "He talked me out of the prenup." I said I knew. She said, "He knows about my brokerage account. I never told him the balance." I said I knew that too. Then she cried, not loudly. The kind of crying that is private and internal and doesn't ask for anything from anyone else. I moved my chair around the table and sat next to her and put my hand on her back and let her cry for as long as she needed to. When it passed, she sat up straight. She wiped her face, and she looked at me with an expression I had not seen on her since she was 15 years old and had made a decision about something and was not going to be moved from it. She said, "I want him to know that I know. I don't want to just disappear. I want him to understand that he underestimated both of us." I told her I had an idea. We talked for 3 hours. By the time she drove home that night, we had a plan. We did not cancel the wedding immediately. We did not contact Garrett. We did not change a single visible thing about the next 11 weeks of preparation. Vivian continued to go to venue meetings and cake tastings and dress fittings. She continued to text Garrett good morning. She performed every part of the role he expected her to play, and she performed it flawlessly, because she is her mother's daughter, and her mother could hold a feeling inside without showing it until she chose to show it. I will tell you that those 11 weeks were the hardest of my life, not because I doubted the plan, but because I watched my daughter carry a truth that was heavy enough to bend most people, and she carried it with her chin up, and I was so proud of her, and so heartbroken for her at the same time that I didn't always know what to do with myself. My brother handled the legal piece. A family attorney in Charlotte who had been recommended to us, a woman who had handled asset protection cases and knew North Carolina family law thoroughly. She reviewed the recording. She confirmed its validity as documentation of intent. She helped Vivian move certain assets into a protected structure before the wedding date. Quietly, carefully. All above board, all legal. By the time October arrived, the financial landscape that Garrett thought he understood had been substantially rearranged. He had no idea. The wedding day was a Saturday, blue sky, 64 degrees. The kind of October day that North Carolina does better than anywhere else in the country. The venue in Waxhaw looked exactly the way Vivian had planned it for 14 months. 200 guests, white roses, string lights coming on as the sun went down. I walked my daughter down that aisle. I want you to understand what that moment was. I held her arm and I looked at her face, and she looked back at me, and neither of us was performing anything in that moment. We were just a father and his daughter, walking together, carrying something enormous between us that no one else in that barn could see. Garrett was standing at the altar in a charcoal suit, smiling the smile of a man who believed he had won. The ceremony proceeded. The vows were exchanged. The rings were placed. The officiant said what officiants say. 200 people applauded. The lights came on. The band started playing. Garrett Allen had married my daughter, and he thought he was in. The reception moved the way receptions move, with the first dance and the toasts and the dinner service and the noise and the warmth that fills a room when people who love each other are in the same place. I gave a toast. I had written it carefully. It said everything a father says at his daughter's wedding, and every word of it was true, and I looked at Vivian while I said it, not at Garrett. About 45 minutes into the reception, during the open dancing, I walked over to where Garrett was standing near the bar with 2 of his friends. I said I needed a moment with him privately. He came willingly, the way confident men do when they don't see the thing that is coming. We stepped outside to a small stone terrace off the side of the barn. The night air was cool. The string lights were visible through the window. I said, "Garrett, I want to tell you something before this night goes any further." He smiled and said, "Of course, what is it?" I took out my phone. I played the recording. I watched his face while the 4 minutes and some seconds played. I had watched my daughter's face listen to this in a dining room 11 weeks ago, and it had broken my heart. Watching Garrett's face was something different. The confidence drained out of him in stages, like water finding the cracks in old concrete. By the time it finished, he was a different person than the man who had walked down the aisle 12 hours earlier. He started to say something. I said, "I'm not finished." I told him about the attorney. I told him about the asset restructuring. I told him what Vivian's current legally reachable asset picture looked like compared to what he thought it looked like. I told him about the contact in Columbus. He went very still. I said, "Vivian knows everything. She has known for 11 weeks. The wedding today was her choice. She wanted you to know that you didn't fool her, that we were watching, that you never had what you thought you had." He said, very quietly, "What happens now?" I said. "Now my daughter's attorney will be in contact with you about the terms of annulment. You're going to cooperate fully. You're going to do this quietly, and then you're going to leave Charlotte." He wanted to negotiate. He started talking about the house. I said, "There's nothing to negotiate. There is no house. There is a recording, and there is a pattern, and there is an attorney who is very good at her job, and there is my daughter, who is standing about 30 feet away from us right now, dancing with her cousin and having a better night than you deserve to be a part of." He looked through the window. Vivian was dancing. She was laughing at something her cousin had said. She was wearing her mother's earrings and her grandmother's bracelet and a dress she had chosen herself, and she was beautiful, and she was free. Garrett Allen left the reception within the hour. He told the few people who noticed that he wasn't feeling well. He was out of Vivian's condo and out of Charlotte within 6 weeks. The annulment was completed without litigation. I don't know where he is now. I don't think about him much. What I think about is what I should have done and what I did right. I think about the moment I sat in that alcove and chose stillness over reaction. I think about the 4 hours at the kitchen table, and the call to my brother, and the Sunday pot roast dinner, and watching my daughter's face hear the truth. I think about those 11 weeks she carried that weight without flinching. I think about walking her down that aisle knowing what we both knew. That was not a defeat. I want you to understand that. Some people would say we should have stopped the wedding entirely, and maybe they're right. Maybe there was a cleaner way. But my daughter chose to walk into that day with her eyes open and come out of it on her own terms, and I chose to stand beside her in whatever way she needed me. That's what being a father means to me. Not making the decisions for your child, standing with them in the decisions they make for themselves. Vivian is doing well. She sold the condo 6 months later and bought a place in Plaza Midwood that she loves. She has a garden now. She calls me every Sunday. She is wary in ways she wasn't before, which I think is wisdom more than damage. But I watch for the difference. She told me once, maybe 2 months after everything was settled, that the moment she was most afraid wasn't when she heard the recording. It was when she walked into that venue on the wedding day and saw how beautiful everything was, and realized that a lie can wear the face of something genuine if you're not watching carefully. I think about that too. I'm 63 years old. I've made mistakes as a father. I was away too much when the kids were young. I worked Saturdays for years that I won't get back. I didn't always say the things I felt because I came from a generation of men who were taught that saying things was a form of weakness. I've had to learn that lesson in reverse, slowly, too late in some cases. But I was in that barn on that July afternoon, and I stayed still, and I listened, and I recorded what I heard, and I took it home and I sat with it, and I called my brother and I made pot roast on a Sunday. And I told my daughter the truth, and I stood beside her through every week that followed. That's the promise I made her mother in the hospital room, the last time they were in the same space together, that I would watch over her, that I would not let her face anything alone. I kept that promise. That is the whole story. I don't have a tidy moral for you because life doesn't come with those unless you manufacture them, and I'm too old to manufacture things. What I have is this: pay attention. Not the anxious, suspicious kind of attention that makes you paranoid and drives people away. The quiet kind. The kind where you notice what's there, and you trust what you notice, and you don't talk yourself out of the check in your spirit because it's inconvenient, or because you're afraid of being wrong. And if you are a parent, if you have a child out there building a life and trusting people you haven't vetted and making decisions you can't control, stay close. Not smothering close. Just close enough that when they need you, you're already there, because the cost of not being there is something you will carry for the rest of your life. I sat in that alcove on a July afternoon in Waukesha, North Carolina, and I almost left. I almost stood up and walked outside to get some air and let those two men have their conversation in private. That thought crosses my mind regularly. I'm very glad I stayed. I've been thinking a lot lately about what actually protects the people we love. Not the loud version of protection, not the confrontation in the parking lot, not the threat, not the scene. The quiet version, the kind that requires you to sit still when every part of you wants to move, the kind that asks you to think when you'd rather just react. What Garrett was counting on was reaction. He had built his entire plan around the assumption that people operate on emotion, that a father who hears something terrible will do something loud and impulsive and easy to dismiss. He had probably done this before. I believe he had, and it had worked before because most people, when they are hurt or afraid, collapse the distance between feeling and action. They say what they feel the moment they feel it, and that's understandable. That's human, but it hands the advantage to the person who is already playing a longer game than you realized. What I did in that alcove, staying still, picking up my phone, recording, was not clever strategy in the moment. I want to be honest about that. It was just the instinct of an old man who had learned, slowly and sometimes painfully over 6 decades, that the first response is rarely the right one. That the thing you say in anger almost never lands the way you need it to. That patience is not weakness. It is the most disciplined form of strength there is. Vivian taught me something in those 11 weeks too. She already knew, intellectually, that Garrett was not who he said he was, but she chose to carry that knowledge with grace instead of bitterness. She did not fall apart. She did not become someone she wasn't in order to survive something difficult. She stayed herself, thoughtful, deliberate, clear-eyed, and she walked through one of the hardest experiences a person can walk through without letting it make her cruel or fearful or small. That is what I mean when I say character is something you build over time, Not in the big moments. In the 1,000 small moments before the big one arrives, when you're deciding what kind of person you're going to be when it costs you something. Vivian had been building that kind of character her whole life. The crisis didn't create it. It just revealed it. And Garrett. I don't spend much time thinking about him, but when I do, I think about this. He was extraordinarily skilled at appearing to be something he was not. He had spent years perfecting that skill, and in the end, that skill was the very thing that undid him. He was so confident in his performance that he forgot to check the room. He forgot that a quiet corner of a barn is still a room. He forgot that a quiet corner of a barn is still a room. He forgot that trust does not mean blindness. He forgot that the people he was underestimating had been paying attention the whole time, just not in the way he expected. What you put into the world comes back, not always on your timeline, not always in the form you expect, but the pattern of who you are follows you. Garrett's pattern caught up with him. Vivian's character protected her. And I was just a father who stayed in his seat on a July afternoon when his instinct told him to be still. That is the whole lesson, if there is one. Be still when stillness is what the moment requires. Tell the truth to the people who need to hear it, even when it costs you. Stand beside the people you love and the decisions they make for themselves. And pay attention. Not the paranoid kind, but the patient kind. Because the truth about a person almost always makes itself known eventually. You just have to be in the room when it does.